All right, God bless everybody. I know it's another little video of just sitting and talking for a little bit, but the lakes where I'm at still froze, and I wanted to just try to share just a little bit more information in preparation for hopefully here in a couple more days. Going to get to go out and go fishing. Air temperature around here is about 40 or 50. At water temperature though, still a lot of them are froze. You got to understand that this time of year, I think this is actually worse for us, because most people, when it comes to that transition time, they know that winter's coming, they winterize their boats, they do all this kind of stuff, and then they're okay with it because they're used to it. And then after about Christmas and it starts to set in, you know, sitting around watching fishing videos, watching different things, you start to, man, I can't wait till it warms up and I can get ready to go. So a lot of times on these days that finally, when we're getting ready to see here pretty soon in the next couple of weeks, the lakes are going to unthaw, and you're going to want to go out, and you want to go out fishing, and you're going to put on the same baits that you had right before you quit fishing around the fall. Most of you are going to pick up your square bills. Most of you are going to pick up a spinner bait, and you're going to use it at the same speed that you were using it before, and you're going to go and you're going to catch maybe, if you do catch a fish, you'll catch one, and then you're going to go home and be like, oh man, I got to wait another month. Well, I'm going to tell you that that's not true. What you have to do is you have to approach it completely different. To the people who've already transitioned over, and during the winter months, they've been using little flat crankbaits, they've been using tight line, they've been using, even believe it or not, the little Ned rig, as long as you keep it under that 10th ounce or or use that little tight line with that little 1/8 ounce ball head. I know around Cumberland a lot, they'll use that float and fly. Shad Rap still works if you use it right. If you use these little techniques, and believe it or not, kind of like the wild card between all of them, and I have made myself a goal this year that I'm going to try my best to get better at using them, is the wiggle wart. The wiggle wart really comes to life. I've just heard it over and over and over so many years, and this year I'm going to plan on trying to use that bait more than I ever have, because I really want to get better at just using the wiggle wart. Now, is it a crankbait just like everything else is a crankbait? Yes. Am I going to go get the pre-repellers? Probably not. I'm probably going to use just the regular ones that you can just buy at the store. But that's the fun in it. That's the challenge. Okay, so I usually try to set myself a challenge. What I want to talk to you in this video, though, is something that hopefully you'll find very useful, because it's a thought process that people have when it comes to crankbaits that you really need to, if possible, to try to overcome. And if you want to be successful in these colder days approaching, you really need to step out of your comfort zones and not necessarily get a couple of this one I'm going to show you, but you need to try this style of bait, okay? And you need to start looking at it a little bit different. So everybody knows what this little bait is, or most people do. I've got these little rubber bands that's blocking the bottom of it. This is a Spro Little John, okay? This little bait right here is about 1/2 ounce, because it has a little ball inside of it. You can't really hear that ball inside of it because that little ball is kind of dulled down. That's just the way this specific one is made. And it's a Flatside crankbait, which everybody's heard everything in the world about Flatside crankbaits by now. It also has that either micarta or computer chip bill. This little bait, I usually throw it, you can throw it on any size line you want to, anywhere from 10 to 15. You could go heavier than 15 if you wanted to, but in my personal opinion, unless you're slow rolling square bills or something like that, you go heavier than 15, you do dull the action just a little bit, and you're definitely going to challenge how deep it goes. that diameter of the line really resists, and I've put it to the test. I have thrown crankbaits before on 20-pound line and deep diving ones, and I've caught tons of fish on them. But it was real windy that day and the conditions were just right. The only reason I used 20 is because that's what I had on the rods that I had with me, and that was years ago. Okay, here lately I use pretty much either 15-pound red label Seaguar, or every now and then I'll use a 12-pound P-line CXX. That's usually one of the two lines that I use anymore. Used to use 12-pound monofilament all the time, and the common between all those is they all have about the same diameter. Okay, believe it or not, the 15-pound Seaguar is the smallest diameter of the three. That is probably my first option, that 15-pound Seaguar, even with a little bait like this. And I'm going to tell you the reason why you need to change your mindset on a flat-sided crankbait. Most of the time, the only thing you're going to hear is on a flat-sided crankbait, you need to use it because it's got that tight little wiggle. Okay, well, that's true, but what you need to do is, instead of just saying, well, it needs that tight little wiggle, when you use this crankbait, you need to think of it as a finesse presentation in crankbaits. Okay, so let's explain that a little bit. When we go throw a jig, and you throw a 1/2 ounce jig, and you go down a bank, and everybody you know on that lake is throwing a 1/2 ounce jig, your option probably would be to pick up a 1/4 ounce jig and go back through that. Well, now you've done that, you still can't get a bite. You come back through that section and you really start to get finesse now. You start to throw either a shaky head or a drop shot. You know, all of those presentations still are, you don't notice it at first, but when you get to that big bulky jig and you step down to that drop shot, when you work that drop shot, do you tend to work it as fast? Does it sink as fast? Does it move like that? You say, well, no, it's a little more finesse-ier presentation. But when you throw flat-sided crankbaits, you need to remind yourself, if you're in the cold water, to slow the presentation down. Even in the cold water, deflecting off of things is still important. It will still trigger you bites, okay? The exception of that would be the Shad Rap. So far, the Shad Rap, when I've used it, it seems to draw a lot of fish, and you don't have to. You don't necessarily have to bang it into different things. Actually, when you put the different size hooks on the Shad Rap, it's kind of hard to bang into wood things because it doesn't come through wood very well. Now, if you're around rock and stuff, it does fairly well. This little bait, on the other hand, when you get the flat-sided crankbaits, most of them do come through that wood fairly well. So you can still fish a flat-sided crankbait through wooded areas, but what you have to do is you have to slow down the presentation. You'll be surprised, even in dirtier colored water. Now, I'm not telling you to throw them in muddy water, even though I have. But still, the important factor is trying to get it to bang into some type of wood cover. Because as soon as it bangs into that wood cover, it creates a reaction. It creates some type of thought process, I believe, into those bass, that they're like, it's injured. It hit that thing because it's something's wrong with it. It could be a territory thing. Honestly, we don't know the mind of the bass, so we don't really know. It could be a territory thing, like a cat. Cat's okay if you come by it, but you start poking at it and it'll reach out and smack you. So that bass may be the same thing. That may be what it's after. But it is interesting to me how it's not just that tighter wiggle, it's the movement of the bait. And the reason I'm going to tell you that it's not just that tighter wiggle is because I have been able to take this same crankbait, and in the summertime, you heard me right, take a flat-sided crankbait. Whoever thought of such a thing? Take a flat-sided crankbait in the summer, same bait, reel it just a little bit faster. Not saying burn it like you would burn a rattle trap, but reel it faster in that clear water where you had 5 to 6 foot visibility in that exact same color, and fish just come out of the wood and just nail it. Once again, what's the common denominator? The common denominator is bouncing it through wood, because they see that erratic action. That's the difference. That's something that a lot of people don't realize, and you hear people talk about it. Anybody you hear, especially a lot of the guys that fish the Elite Series, a lot of the guys that fish the bigger tournaments, you hear them talking about it all the time, about taking a square bill, taking any type of crankbait, spinner bait, any bait that they're using that they're constantly moving. The buzz bait, you hear them talk about when you're bringing that buzz bait through, bring it right over a log, make it bang into the pilings. Why are they doing that? Because it triggers something in those bass that they all of a sudden come out and lunge at it. You say, well, I didn't think you could do that because you don't want things ricocheting around too much in cold water. No, you don't want it a lot in cold water, but you can still bump that little tree limb or bump that stump with a crankbait in the early cold water right before spring, and you'll be surprised how many bites you get. When I throw the spinner bait, I look for the same thing. I don't mind one bit that spinner bait banging around and going into those trees. I'll throw it right to the heart of it and reel it back slowly to me and let it work its way through that stuff. So a flat-sided crankbait, though, a lot of times, if you know that the area that you're at, or I'm just going to use this for an example too, a lot of times you'll see me, and I've even made a couple videos doing it, you'll see me have a square bill on, and then you'll see me have a flat-sided crankbait on. And I'll go down the bank one time, and I may catch 2 or 3 fish. And then I'll go back through that bank again with that flat-sided square bill, and I'll go back down, pick up another fish or 2. And then I'll move on to the next bank. You say, well, why would you do that? Because you'll be surprised how many fish key into one versus the other. You'll be surprised how many fish have seen constant baits, constant baits. We all think that because, and this is something I struggled with for years, I fished in little small lakes a lot. I mean, really small lakes, okay? Compared to Cumberland, they would be about half the size of the pocket that you would fish sometimes in Cumberland, okay? And after you go there and you only have one day to go because that's your day off, and then the day that you go tends to be sometimes a weekend, so here you are going to a place where everybody else is showing up. You know, for some reason they think they have to have tournaments on that little lake, so here they are, 15 boats on this lake, and you're sitting there and you're trying to catch a fish knowing that 20 boats, 15, 20 boats just fished it last night. So they might as well have taken a big net and just dredged the lake, even though they think, oh yeah, we've done great because I don't know, we all put in $5 and we won $25. But anyway, those are hard conditions. Okay, that's the point. Those are hard conditions to fish in. Those are, you may be out there on your kayak, which how it was originally for me, and you're facing this little local lake that all of a sudden by 10:30 there's 15 other kayaks on it, and there's people all the way around the bank, and you're like, man, how in the world am I going to get a bite out here today? Well, if you start thinking to yourself, what is everybody using to catch these fish? What do I see the majority of the people using? You'll be surprised. You think, well, the best thing to use in that lake is, best thing to do is to throw a little finesse worm. That's what everybody usually goes to a lot of times. And that's great. Well, you throw a finesse worm, and every time your finesse worm, you get a bite, it seems like they pick it up and drop it. Pick it up and drop it. Pick it up, drop it. And you're like, what's going on? What's the deal? Well, then you pick up a jig, and you pick up a 1/4 ounce jig, and you think, well, if I go to a finesse jig, then this will work, because why? They'll pick it up and they'll drop it. And you're like, man, I don't understand it. How in the world am I going to catch a fish out here? I'm throwing the finesse baits of all finesse baits. How am I not getting a bite? Well, I'm telling you that the most overlooked finesse bait there is a finesse crankbait. You say, well, how is a finesse crankbait better than a drop shot, better than a shaky head, better than those other little baits? Well, it has to do with the conditions. You can't, if the fish are on the bottom and they're 20 foot, of course this little square bill ain't gonna work, okay? But if you're able to put yourself in situations, going a little bit earlier, that way you're there right before daylight. Going on rainy days, most days that'll challenge a lot of people that don't want to go there. Going on cold conditions, most anglers aren't going to get out in the water in cold conditions because they don't even believe you can catch fish. Plus they don't want to get cold, because most bass fishermen, I would say probably that 50% of the bass fishermen, almost challenging it to almost 60% of the bass fishermen, are fair weather fishermen. They like fishing when the nice weather outside. They like fishing in wonderful conditions, okay? Wonderful conditions being the sun's out and they're warm, okay? You say, okay, but in those type of conditions, how do I get a bite? Finesse crankbaits, and I've proved it. I've done it myself. Can you catch fish on all those other techniques? Yes, you can. You can catch fish on drop shots, you can catch fish on shaky heads, but a lot of times we overlook the fact that the bait that people may be using over and over and over and over and over again is something totally different. That is why I believe the Ned rig has become so popular. Okay, the Ned rig, whether you realize it or not, the key is exposed hooks, is what I believe it is. Drop shot to me has an exposed hook. That's how I use it most of the time. The Ned rig has an exposed hook. That's what makes it very useful. The tight line has an exposed hook. You don't really have to have them hold the bait very long. They pretty much set the hook themselves, on themselves, okay? Why? Because of an exposed hook. It's a little finesse crankbait, the little shad wraps. Top water a lot of times becomes a very important thing. Certain top waters, that may be the type of place where you can go throw a buzz bait, you can throw it all day long, you're lucky to catch 3 fish. You may turn around and go to that same lake and throw a little popper, a little 2-inch little popper, and be amazed at all the fish you catch. Why? Because it may very well be that 90% of the people there throw a buzz bait. Why? Because the buzz bait doesn't hang up, a buzz bait makes all that racket, buzz bait, you see all the videos about all the explosions. So you really have to rethink your thought process on what's finesse and what's power fishing for everybody else, because believe it or not, you may wind up catching more. A lot of people are going out here and buying these Kitechs. They're 3 or 4 inches long. Why? Because they want to catch that big fish. A lot of people pick up the chatterbait because that's what they saw on the last elites. That's what everybody did good with. What you didn't realize is that everybody that fishes tournaments on that little lake loves throwing that chatterbait, and they've thrown thousands of chatterbaits on that little place. So guess what? They don't bite it very good. Well, then what in the world am I going to use? Well, there's nothing wrong with throwing a swim bait, but how about throwing a little 2.5, 3-inch swim bait? Oh, that's too small. Once again, I've proved it. You know, I had a friend teach me how to throw that little swim bait, and guess what? Threw it on 8-pound line, a little spinning outfit, caught fish. So our thought process of what finesse is, if we want to be successful anglers, needs to change. Needs to change because a lot of times the reason why we're not catching fish, I made a video about this, is because of pride. A lot of times, guess what? We want to keep using the same thing I always used. I don't want to learn new things. Happens a lot to an older guy, okay? Older guy and older, you know what I like doing? I like going out and I like catching fish. Sure, I like enjoying God's creation. I like enjoying the time that I'm out. Yes, I'm not at work, but it is kind of neat every now and then to have a little fish at the end of your line, reel it in. No, it doesn't have to be huge, but guess what? If you went out 2 or 3 trips in a row and you weren't getting a bite, and you didn't even, you're thinking, man, what a nice little feeling it is to go out and catch 1 or 2 little fish. And you're like, praise the Lord, I finally caught a little fish. Thank you, Lord, for finally helping me catch a little fish. And then all of a sudden it clicks and you realize, wow, I was doing something different today. Huh. And you go out and you try that again next time. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. But not, you try something else. You try another little smaller bait, or that's what we always tend to think. Try something with a different action in it. Now this here doesn't have rattles. This in here, like I said, it's silent. This to me is more of a true finesse bait. Is it okay if it rattles? Sure. But if you're on a lake that they use a rattle trap constantly, and that's what they catch a lot of the fish, and the bigger size of the lake, it doesn't seem to matter as much. The smaller the lake, it does seem to matter a lot. It also depends, a lot of people don't realize this, it depends the season that you're in, how much that matters. Right now, here in a couple weeks, it doesn't matter as much. But if once a tournament start kicking in and somebody's beat a bank up 3 or 4 times, very well may have run the fish off that bank. But if it's a smaller lake, they only got so many places they can go. So that makes a big difference also. Anyway, wanted to mention this a little bit though, because there's so much information to fishing. Would I rather be fishing today? You can believe me, I would rather be fishing today. But I have to go to work in order to not just support my family, but I also have responsibilities, and I also have other bills. And that's just what we're supposed to do. The Bible tells us very plainly that if we don't work, we shouldn't eat. So I like to eat, so I guess I'm gonna go to work. But I wanted to share that with you, okay? That's another reason why, even in the summertime, you'll see me experimenting. I have quite a few little boxes full of crankbaits. I pick them up here and there. Some of them for $2 or $3. It's just different places, different people sell them. I buy them for $2 or $3. I'll sit down and try to use them in different circumstances because I just like catching them. I don't have a specific one that I throw all the time. I have certain ones that I throw different times of the year, different styles. But I just like trying the different baits and seeing, hey, what conditions does this bait need? And that's just what I'm telling you. These little flat-sided crankbaits, don't just look at them as, oh, it's winter time and I threw them away. Or I put them in the box and I put them up. They'll be ready for fall and spring. If that's the crankbait that you caught fish on, think about this just for a minute. This is what I'll end with. If that's the crankbait you caught fish in the coldest water, in the hardest conditions of the year, okay? That's what you used. Nothing else was working. And that bait caught you fish. And I've caught several 3 to 4 pound largemouth on this little bait, okay? Why would you not throw it in the middle of the spring when you're having one of those days that the sun's out, it's bluebird, and you're having a hard time, and you throwed your drop shot, and you can't get a bite? Why, and that wind picks up a little bit, explain to me why you wouldn't pick up this little bait. Explain to me why those conditions, oh, that's because it's cold water. It has nothing to do with cold water. Cold water is a good time to throw this bait. But as a finesse presentation, you don't think twice to pick up that drop shot of that shaky head to throw it into those conditions. Well, no. But do you think that in those conditions you couldn't throw this around that stump and still draw a strike and be surprised at what size bass come out and get it? Because when he comes out and gets it, he's going to get the treble hooks, okay? Most of the time. So you need to ask yourself that question. I use all my other presentations if it's sunny and bluebird. So if I'm going to go out fishing, and I'm not going to go out, if I've fished all morning throwing a buzz bait, throwing a topwater, throwing all these active baits and nothing's working, and throwing a square bill, and I didn't get a bite for the first 2 or 3 hours, I'm going to maybe take that square bill off, switch on to a little tighter bait, pick up a finesse rig, pick up my drop shot rig, and those are the baits I'm going to use towards the afternoon. Why? Because the bite's tougher, obviously. The bite's harder. The bite's a little more challenging. That's when I go to my finesse presentations. It's the same reason why I would pick up a flat bait, and I could still throw a crankbait, but I'm going to throw a flat-sided one because it's got that tighter wiggle, okay? But it's more of finesse. It's not as intrusive, okay? It still has the same characteristics of a square bill crankbait, but it's not as intrusive. it doesn't have the loud rattles in it. It doesn't have all this stuff, okay? So that's finesse presentation. It's something that is more natural to the bass, okay? So anyway, just a thought process. Hope this blesses y'all. Didn't mean to take it this long, but anybody that watches my videos knows I tend to be a little long-winded anyway, and I'm sorry. But I hope it blesses you. I hope it helps you. More than anything, I hope all of us here lately able to get back on the lake here pretty soon. We probably all have about at least another month before we can go full force again. But whatever you do, be safe on the water. Make sure you take lots of warm clothes with you, because it is still cold a lot of places. And even if it's warm outside, that water's cold, so be very careful there as well. Anyway, God bless you all, and don't forget, Jesus loves you all. Y'all have a blessed day.